All right, everyone, welcome. You are joining the 7th session of the Colorado Restaurant and Bar Virtual Education Series. You've joined us for What Does the Future Hold? We're going to give it just a moment here while our attendees join us, and then I'll hand everything over to Sonia Riggs, the President and CEO of the Colorado Restaurant Association. All right, if you want to take it from here, Sonia.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for joining us, everybody, for the 7th session of our 2020 Colorado Restaurant and Bar Show Virtual Education Series. We created this series because we know that this pandemic has been devastating to the restaurant industry, and many of you are wondering how you will survive. So the point of these programs is to try to help however we can with that. In weekly sessions, we've been featuring industry experts who will dig into operational best practices to give practical, implementable ideas you can immediately apply to your own business. Joining us today is Hudson Riley, Senior Vice President of the Research and Knowledge Group at the National Restaurant Association, and Mike Watley, Vice President of State and Local Affairs, also at the National Restaurant Association. Hudson will walk us through key economic data that illuminates the state of the industry and what may be coming. Then Mike will talk about 2021 legislative priorities, and I suspect, Mike, you'll also give us an update on what's happening right now at the federal level. If you do have any questions, please use the Q&A function in the bottom menu of your Zoom window. We will be posting the recording of the discussion in about 24 hours in the CRB Show Educational Series event app. Please let me add also that after a break for the holidays, this series will continue over the course of the next several months. We'll cover a number of topics, including social media, crisis communication, and more. You can join us for one session, join us for all sessions, or anything in between. The sign up for the series is on Event Cadence, and stay tuned for more details on the programs that we'll be featuring next year. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Hudson.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the association's research group, it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk with you about the current state of the restaurant industry, and most importantly, where we see it heading the remainder of this year into next. My presentation is currently constructed, has 3 distinct components. First, we'll look at the overall economic environment this year, and most importantly, heading into 2021. Then we'll look at how industry performance has and will occur against that backdrop. And then finally, I have a wrap up. And before I get started, it's important to review the association's official definition of what constitutes the restaurant industry. And that is all meal, snacks, alcohol prepared away from home, including all takeout meals and beverages. And it is the latter part of that statement, which we refer to as the off-premises market, which includes takeout, delivery, drive-through, curbside, mobile, and catering. It is that component which has really been the driving force behind the industry's situation over the past 9 months, and going forward continues to be important. And so, for example, if you look at restaurant industry traffic pre-pandemic, 63% of that was off premises, the majority. But even if you look at the second quarter going into the third quarter, that number jumped up to 90% of all restaurant traffic was off premises. So it really has become a very important driver of growth going forward, but more importantly, from the consumer perspective, has really stepped up to meet their demands for convenience. Also, too, the restaurant industry isn't this monolithic entity. These are just an example of 10 different segments. The association looks at sales in almost 70 different segments. But for example, full service pre-pandemic remained the largest dollar volume, followed by quick service. Rapidly growing segments included contractors, retail hosts, and snack and non-alcoholic beverage bars. So moving on to the economic situation, you can see, looking at that 2020 timeline there, real GDP, once again, real is just inflation adjusted GDP, dollar volume of goods and services, national economy. a record drop this year of well over 4%. You can see next year we're looking for a rebound of about 3.5%, but no way does the national economic output reach the level that it was pre-pandemic next year. So that means that the recovery of the total economy moves well into 2022. Also, too, in terms of employment, and the reason we look at employment so much is that it generates income, and income growth is what is very closely correlated with restaurant sales growth. And at its worst point there in April 20, you can see that the national economy was down by over 22 million jobs. Now, half of that has regained, and so the national economy is still down by almost 10 million jobs. But most importantly, you'll notice that the rate of employment growth has slowed dramatically. And obviously, not all the employment growth has been uniform across the country. You know, as we always say, restaurant sales are local. And you can see here, looking at the states in red and yellow, those are the states that have endured the highest proportional employment loss, followed by the gray, and the states in green and blue are the ones that have generally not lost proportionally as many jobs as the others. Also, too, consumer confidence is directly correlated with ability to get a job. You'll notice that among the 9 census regions, the wide variances between consumer confidence. So for example, the West North Central region, which is, for example, Minnesota and the Dakotas, has the highest consumer confidence, followed by Mountain and West South Central, which is Texas, Oklahoma, for example. And the lowest consumer confidence is in New England and Middle Atlantic. And Middle Atlantic is Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York. So it's a situation that is extremely variable. Looking at basically employment trends over the past decade, it's important to understand one of the major developments of employment growth over the past decade, and that was that employment growth was dramatically stronger in metropolitan city areas than it was in rural areas. So you can see over the past 6 years, the employment growth in cities has been nearly double that of what has happened in rural areas. And so consequently, the pandemic changes these dynamics, the migration out of these cities, and consequently restaurant sales follow that migration pattern. In terms of restaurant industry employment, you can see that trend pretty well mirrors what's going on with the national. The situation now, as you notice in November, is for the first time since April, industry employment actually went negative. And looking ahead towards the next few months as the pandemic continues to rage on, the employment outlook short term does remain soft, but overall next year there will be a partial recovery. Also, following that employment growth pattern, income, we tend to look at real disposable, which just means inflation adjusted after tax income. You notice this year, it shows a pretty hefty 5% real gain, the highest you can see over the past decade. But don't be deluded by that because that includes the stimulus payments. And so next year, absence of any stimulus, income growth will actually skew negative again because employment growth remains dampened. So hopefully that stimulus package comes through and it is substantial, but it's important to understand in terms of microeconomies at a city level, employment growth impacts income growth, which impacts restaurant sales growth. And also in terms of where consumers spend, basically food overall pre-pandemic was just 13% of consumer expenditures. Housing and transportation take half. And half of that food expenditure was for restaurant meal solutions. But other categories are rapidly growing, taking their share. And when we talk to restaurant operators, 5-10 years ago, we talked about competition among other operators. But now the competition is to get that dollar not only into food service, but then the competition with other operators. And if that isn't enough, also too, as you would expect, consumer saving rates have moved up dramatically. And if you look at that 07 to 09 timeframe there, which was the Great Recession, right? That was the worst economic environment prior to the pandemic. You can see that consumers have ratcheted up their savings. And so consequently, in addition to lower income growth and availability, savings rates have picked up. Also too, in terms of travel and tourism, 1 out of every $4 in restaurants is travel and tourism related. So consequently, there's great variability across the areas in terms of their tourism mix. We tend to look at business, leisure, and international visitation. You can see last year, pre-pandemic, business and leisure were okay. Even then, international visitation was dropping. And then you can see the bottom just falls out across all categories this year. Now, part of that will be regained in 2021, but like with GDP, no way does tourism reach their pre-pandemic levels. Also, another way to look at tourism is looking at TSA screenings. You can see that pre-pandemic, this is daily, it was about 2.3 million. And consequently, even though the trend has been going up relatively slowly, but recently, there's still a wide gap to be regained. So moving on to industry performance, prior to the pandemic this year, we were looking for sales of $899 billion. We're now looking at sales of $659 billion. That's a $240 billion drop, 27%. So a sizable impact on the industry. Another way to look at that is the share of the food dollars spent away from home. In 2019, over half of all food spending in America was allocated towards restaurants. Currently, it is 47%, so it's down substantially. But if you go back and you look at second quarter, that number was in the high 30% range. So things have gotten better, but obviously not back to where they need to be. Also, too, another way to look at restaurant sales is on a monthly basis. This is for eating and drinking places, about 66% of the industry. That black line there, you can see the 2020 line, that rapid drop, February, March, April, then some rebound to June, but it's basically plateauing now, particularly if you look at that September and October. And so what's happened is the industry now is at sales levels from the year 2016. 4 years of growth of the restaurant industry have still vanished. Another way to look at it is what's going on with restaurant traffic. We tend to look at it by meal period. The blue line on the top represents proportion of adults using restaurants in the past week. Pre-pandemic, you can see it was reaching over 3 out of 5, the rapid plummet, and then again, the gradual build out, but the stagnation which has occurred in that November timeframe. Looking at the off-premises, not surprisingly, the off-premises overall across the day parts has moved up. And so that's where the operator community has focused a lot of their efforts. Operationally, it's certainly true that certain segments and operation types had a leg up in terms of the ability to tap into that off-premise market rapidly, but the consumer has gotten quite used to using it. In terms of pent-up demand for restaurants, this looks at consumer demand for both on and off premises. And you can see right out of the box there in April, pent-up demand jumped and then gradually is easing back. But you'll notice the blue bars there, table service, there is still substantial pent-up demand for the on premises, and then the off premises you can see has actually been moving down a little. For many years now, on a monthly basis, the association has surveyed restaurant operators. You can see, not surprisingly, coronavirus remains the top concern, but that number is actually down from where it was in the second and third quarters, where you had 80 to 90% of operators. So that once again, the trend line is correct, but the magnitude of the change remains quite anemic. In terms of operator perceptions about the general economy, look at the blue bars there, the ones that expect better conditions. So That second quarter, operators were optimistic they could get through this on a short-term basis. And then in July, basically their future-looking sentiment falls off the cliff. And so you can see it's pretty stagnating there. Just 1 out of 3 expect better conditions in 6 months. And across the segments, it really is a tale of two cities. If you look on the right-hand side, those yellow bars, proportion of operators expecting higher sales in 6 months, dramatically higher among quick service, fast casual operators. And then look at the left-hand side with those blue bars expecting lower sales in 6 months in the family and casual dining. Also, another interesting development has been the rapid escalation in grocery store prices compared to menu price growth. The blue bars are menu price growth, inflation, yellow bars, grocery store price inflation. And from a customer perception now, grocery store price inflation, it now exceeds restaurant menu price inflation. This is the first time this happened really since 2011. So from the customer perspective, that price value relationship is a little better. But grocery stores, the reason they're deflationary those couple years there is because wholesale food prices were lower. But now in the pandemic, wholesale food prices are moving up again. And so once again, dependent upon the menu theme and how it affects operator input cost, certain commodity groups such as eggs, beef, cheese are up substantially, and other commodity groups such as fresh vegetables and lobsters and butter are down substantially. Restaurants are extremely labor intensive. If you look at the sales per employee, just 64,000. So consequently, technology, even in the pandemic, has been a very important catalyst of growth and demand. Consumers are ready to use restaurant technology. Over 1 out of 3 says there's not enough technology currently in the restaurant experience. And across the board, you find consumers actually looking for more technology in terms of service, making the takeout experience easier, and particularly ordering and payment. And so if you look at what customers are using restaurant technology for, it's pretty pedestrian. They're just looking at menus, looking at directions, locations, hours open, reviews, and more importantly now, digital ordering, placing an online order. If you go back pre-pandemic, just 1 out of every 20 orders in the restaurant industry was digital. Now it is up to 1 out of 5. So understanding the ability to tap into that digital market is an important catalyst of growth going forward. The mobile payment you can see here, and this was pre-pandemic, the ability to pay, have a touchless experience at food service operation now. And as you would expect, the younger generations are much more adept in seeking out mobile payments and touchless. In terms of food and beverage trends, as the association has done for many years, we survey well over 650 chefs, give them a list of 130 food and beverage items and trends. These were the top 5 out of that extensive list. There are 3 primary themes here, which are still true even in the pandemic. Eco-friendly packaging, in other words, the focus and communication of the importance of sustainability in the operation, plant-based proteins, and portability. If you look at delivery-friendly and healthy bowls, tie into that the ability to get that product on the off-premises market. The major development in terms of alcohol has also been the ability to deliver drinks with that food order. A lot of different municipalities have jumped on this bandwagon. Some of these changes will go past the end of the pandemic. But from the consumer perspective, they definitely embrace the ability to have alcohol beverages as part of that food delivery order. So to wrap up, looking at the association's 2030 study, definition of restaurant will continue to change. We now think of this more in terms of points of access. The virtual ghost locations are not only important now, but only become more so over the next decade. Off-premises opportunities will continue to drive industry growth going forward. Margin pressures, even in a normal environment pre-pandemic, just 4 to 6% of sales. that has really tightened up substantially more. And in addition, on top of that, proportionally labor costs are a much higher allocation towards the total expenses. Also, data is king. The ability to use many of these new technologies and apps to link loyalty systems into the collection of data and the ability to use and turn this data, because basically good business decisions are built on good data. And then finally, the demographics, both of the employee workforce as well as the consumer base, are changing. America continues to age, increase diversity. So it not only impacts the customer base, but also the employee base as well. And in terms of disruptors over the upcoming decade, and it's important to think of these disruptors as really being opportunities in many ways. The intelligence restaurant, for example, using artificial intelligence to change menu pricing by even time of day and day of week, the ability to forecast demand, the rapid advent of virtual restaurants and cloud kitchens, more and more apps on smartphones that allow consumers to make spontaneous decisions, and more importantly, the ability to link loyalty systems into these apps. More autonomous vehicles already being used in metropolitan areas pre-pandemic for delivery. And then finally, big tech bundling food. And that would just be, for example, which is already ongoing, Netflix allowing a seamless experience for ordering food and beverage when customers are using these streaming services. In terms of demographics over the next decade, and this will be updated once the new 2020 census data comes out, but you can see over that 12-year period, those states in red over 12 years had population growth of less than 2%. And you can see the states 2 to 7% there in yellow. But the main takeaway here is that there is no substitute for solid population growth, solid employment growth, which generates income growth, which generates additional restaurant sales growth. Looking at the macroeconomic outlook for next year, real GDP, obviously the rebound, but not near to where it needs to be to get up to the pre-pandemic levels. Absent of any major stimulus package, incomes dropping, inflation moving back up, and employment positive, but not of the magnitude to recover the losses. So 2020, obviously an intense year of contraction, looking towards the disruptive, but mainly hopefully opportune trends occurring in terms of food, technology, the demographics. The uncertainty and weakness continues well into next year and beyond. Greater emphasis from the operator perspective on that off-premises market, drive-through delivery, carryouts, also the delivery of alcohol, and even value-added products, which, for example, are just products where labor is moved down the supply chain off-site. And then the focus on digital. And technology really can be a strategic differential in terms of the ability to grow in this pandemic environment. And so the consumer, because incomes are under pressure, remains tight-fisted, so they constantly have to be nudged and incented into that decision to patronize. So that concludes my portion of this session, and now I'll turn it over to Mike.
Great, thanks, Hudson. I'm going to share my screen here so everyone can see it. And we'll go from the beginning. All right, great. So thanks for having me. Sorry we can't be there in person, but appreciate you all taking the time out of your busy schedules to have a brief conversation about what the 2020 elections meant and where we see things going in 2021. We'll talk federal, we'll talk state, we'll talk local, and then we welcome any of your questions in the chat feature and hope to make it as interactive of a conversation as it can be virtually. So first off, National Restaurant Association, you hear from us frequently, but we represent restaurants of all sizes and all shapes. So chain restaurants, independent restaurants, quick service restaurants, full service restaurants. So our advocacy efforts really doing everything we can to ensure one united industry that is all rowing in the same direction together. 2020 elections. So main takeaways here, I'm not going to read through all of these, but just to put them up on the screen so you get a sense. It's very clear that Americans want competency. They are looking for a government that can handle the coronavirus pandemic and help us get to the other side of it. They rejected chaos and division and really wanted a steady hand in 2021 and going forward. Congressional Democrats, to a certain extent, were a little surprised at how they were unable to make major gains in the United States Senate and actually lost seats in the United States House. So an election that, at least for pundits, surprised a lot of them in terms of less so what happened at the presidential level, but more when you went down ballot and looked at House and Senate. Definitely some surprises there, but it shows the second point. Our nation is very close, closely divided, and it's bitterly divided. People are very much in their corners at times, and there was no overwhelming, huge mandate for either President-elect Biden or for Republicans. You have very much divided government continuing. Divided government is changing in terms of who will be in the White House. But end of the day, many pundits were saying prior to the election to expect a Democratic White House, a Democratic House that would be emboldened, and also most likely a Democratic Senate. And a lot of that didn't happen. Instead, you're going to have continued divided government, but with a different executive in charge. And we'll get into that in a minute in terms of what that means. But lots of big questions in terms of what this means going forward. President-elect Biden, is a transitional leader, and I think he views himself as a transitional leader. He ultimately is the future of the Democratic Party. He is the incoming president, but it is not a giant generational change from one president to the next in terms of age. So, he was largely hired to manage COVID and to change the conversation in DC, to make it less loud and noisy, and to almost, for lack of a better phrase, to make DC a little more boring, which we'll see in the coming months. But overall, definitely some surprises on election night, but largely what you'll see coming from DC is not more of the same, but is similar in terms of it's unlikely you're going to see gigantic legislative packages coming out that will majorly impact the industry in a negative way. Not to say it's impossible, but at least for the short term, that is likely. Have to caveat all of this with there are still 2 Senate races in the state of Georgia that will be decided in January runoffs. If the Republicans incumbent lose both of those, it would be a Democratic Senate. It is very possible that could happen, but given the demographics of Georgia, and yes, President-elect Biden did win Georgia, but given the overall demographics of Georgia, it's certainly a tough hill to climb for a Democrat. So caveating the fact that there could be a Democratic Senate if both of those were to flip, but being realistic that most pundits and most analysts feel that Republicans will maintain control of the U.S. Senate. Key Biden attributes and considerations. He is very much a legislator than an executive. He has been in Congress prior to being in the White House under President Obama. He was in Congress for quite a period of time, and he's also a moderate. He's a centrist. If you look at all of the various candidates in the Democratic primary, Biden was almost certainly the most central, very likely, depending on how you look at it, the most centrist candidate of all the various candidates. He's an institutionalist. He's going to respect people in the process, and he's not going to be out there tweeting, and he's not going to be out there making as many headlines as President Trump has been. On the positive side, President-elect Biden is an optimist of the GOP, and he genuinely believes that he can make deals out there. We will see what happens, but there is a lot of talk about what are issues that Democrats and Republicans can come together on. We will see what happens. It's definitely still a bitter divide in D.C. between what will likely be a Republican Senate, a Democratic House, and a Democratic White House. But President-elect Biden will almost certainly make overtures to Senate Republicans and try to bring them along. That could mean infrastructure, that could mean a different issue, but he is going to do his best to bring Republicans along as best he can. This just kind of rehashes what we just talked about. There is conversation that a lot could get done in terms of having pragmatic leaders in President-elect Biden, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and most likely Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. They could all come together and do some grand bargains. But at the same time, as this slide shows out, they're also at times beholden to the base of their parties, which could make deal making very complicated. So there's some big questions out there in terms of what the next couple of years look like. But overall, we do expect to see less noise coming from DC. It will be divided government, so there will be challenges involving that. And it was perhaps not quite what was expected on election night. So what does that mean for us as an industry? I would be remiss if I jumped into 2021 and did not start talking about what's happening currently in DC. As you all know, at the beginning part of the coronavirus crisis, Congress stepped in and passed several big recovery packages. Not every single one dealt with the industry. Many dealt with testing and what would happen for the federal government, but a gigantic portion of that was the Paycheck Protection Program and what that meant to the industry. That was passed as an 8-week solution to help the industry. As you all know, we are now on month almost 9 of this crisis. And since that initial batch of money, Congress has not allocated more funding. There have been fits and starts at times in terms of will Congress come together, but they haven't until now. We are cautiously optimistic that Congress is going to come together within the next 2 weeks before Christmas and do something. We feel cautiously optimistic that it will include a second round of PPP funding. But what we are viewing this as whatever happens now, and hopefully something does happen now, this is a down payment. This is a great first step. This is a stopgap. We will continue to push for larger amounts of recovery relief in the new Congress. But if Congress doesn't act now before Christmas, we're likely looking at not seeing any real recovery money until February, because inauguration takes place in January. Everyone has to get seated. It will be a while. So we are pushing, and I know many of you have taken action on this, to pass recovery now. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be something to help the industry get through the next couple of weeks and months. If you haven't taken action yet and emailed your members of Congress, please do. We have an action alert live that I know the CRA has pushed out, but please take action now. Your voice really does matter. So that's what's happening with the relief and recovery efforts right now. We do anticipate that if something passes, it will pass in the next couple of days because Congress wants to go home for Christmas, and Congress likely also wants to go home and quarantine prior to seeing family, which requires kind of a week before. So time is of the essence. We're continuing to have those conversations, but also encourage you to have those conversations as well. So we released our blueprint for recovery. This is our overall goals of recovery efforts. We realize that this crisis is not going away anytime soon, and that even once there is a vaccine that's widely available, there has been so much devastation of the industry that it will take quite a while for the industry to recover, which is why we're pushing for this initial down payment now, but also larger programs like the Restaurants Act, the Senate version of the Restaurants Act, which includes franchisees and includes small franchisees and other businesses that are not included in the House version. PPPs up here, ERTC, Healthy Workplace Tax Credit. We're pushing all these issues up there, realizing that what is needed is a multifaceted approach to getting recovery aid. We're also very active in the vaccine prioritization conversation to make sure that restaurant workers are considered critical infrastructure as they have been deemed by the Department of Homeland Security, and pushing for that. On the right-hand side, these are recurring issues. Candidly, if we had seen a Democratic Senate on election night, these issues would be, extremely important, and they are very important. But these would have been, even more of a priority because you would have seen complete consolidation of Democratic power in Washington, and so many of these issues have been more likely to move forward. Doesn't mean we aren't going to push on them. The Democratic House will almost certainly pass many of these. And there's always conversations about compromise. However, these issues, because of the politics of DC, they're important and they may move forward, but they became less likely to be passed into law than they were pre-election, based upon how things were looking pre-election. So labor policy, these are issues that are no surprise to anyone, both in terms of predictive scheduling, wage issues, tipping issues, tax issues, looking at corporate taxes, pass-through taxes, elimination of the FICA tip credit. All these things are priorities, certainly for the Democratic House, and many of them, such as increased unionization, are priorities of the administration of the White House. But because of the divided nature of DC, almost certainly, we expect to see executive action by the president in terms of things that he can do. But in terms of large congressional packages that would include many of these issues, less likely than otherwise could have been. And again, please submit questions via the chat box for additional conversation. Looking at state and local government, a lot of this will be familiar to many of you. So the association worked with our partners at the Colorado Restaurant Association and other restaurant associations around the country on opening guidance. And we continue to try to provide thought leadership to local lawmakers, state lawmakers. We work with the CDC and the FDA to continue to put out new guidance on how restaurants can continue to operate in a safe manner. We have pushed back aggressively, both with our scientific evidence and also in the media, against the idea that restaurants are super spreaders or that restaurants are a risky activity. We think, and you all know, that at times restaurants have been a scapegoat for activity that closes down the economy and closes down restaurants. We have pushed back on that at all levels of government and continue to do so. We've been working with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, National League of Cities, to talk with local leaders about what they can do to help promote restaurants in their community. We've also worked at the state level on deferring restaurant taxes, pushing for new aid, anything that can be done at the state and local level to help restaurants. Cocktails to Go, which you all know well, given your legislation from earlier this year, huge revenue driver. I know Hudson's presentation touched on that a good bit. We continue to work with Sonia and Nick and the whole team here to hopefully make Cocktails to Go a permanent fixture in Colorado going forward. But this has passed and over, or at least has been allowed under emergency order in over 30 states. So significant action on the Cocktails to Go issue across the country. Outdoor dining, as it gets colder and colder, that obviously becomes more challenging, but we have worked with local lawmakers to expand and to streamline the zoning process to allow for outdoor dining and also to allow for money to be given to restaurateurs directly to help them winterize their patios. Also working with local governments to create zoning flexibility to allow for additional off-premises dining. You all know this, this may sound small to the average person, but the ability to take an existing parking spot outside of your restaurant and instead make it a curbside zone is really important. And we continue to push for small fixes, which may seem small to overall population, but are huge revenue drivers. I believe last slide for me up here before taking questions. We have this slide, and for any of you who've seen one of my presentations before, we talk about state and local policy issues. The ones on the left-hand side are issues that we've been dealing with for years as an industry. None of these are really surprises. Labor issues, wage, scheduling, environmental issues like packaging. All of these issues were largely put on the back burner during COVID because of the crisis. Many of these issues are going to come back in 2021 and down the road. Just to point out a couple of them, the environmental issue and packaging. So much additional packaging waste has been created by the expansion of off-premises dining during COVID-19. There is going to be a conversation at some point down the road about what happens with all that waste. So you'll continue to see mandates against straws. You'll continue to see mandatory composting. You're going to see more of that because there's more waste now. On the right-hand side, these are issues that are new since COVID. So we talked about operating guidance. A lot of these deal with the fact that restaurant workers have been deemed essential workers. What does that mean in terms of pay, in terms of protections, in terms of scheduling requirements? A lot of that is to be determined, but it's an ongoing conversation that policymakers will be having come January 2021. Liability, arbitration, workers' compensation, questions about what happens if a diner gets sick or a restaurant employee gets sick, and there are questions whether it is tied to your restaurant or not. Are there liability protections? For workers' compensation in certain states, the presumption is if an employee tests positive for COVID-19, that they got it at their place of employment. Big questions there in terms of what that means. Off-premise alcohol regulations, we just discussed that, but also COVID-19 recovery efforts, just continuing the conversation with state and local lawmakers about what can be done now and going forward to help restaurant operators. This crisis is, hopefully in Q2, Q3, we'll have a vaccine that's available to everyone, and this crisis will begin to abate. But the damage that's been done to the industry over the past several months is going to take a very, very long time to recover for. So continuing to have conversations with policymakers at all levels of government about what can be done to support the industry. As we like to say, and as you all know, restaurants were among the first to be shut down back in March and April this year. And the restaurant industry, perhaps only comparable to hotels or the airline industry, has been hurt incredibly, incredibly hard by this crisis. So what can be done? So with that, I would just encourage all of you to continue to stay active with the Colorado Restaurant Association, continue to stay active with the National Restaurant Association. We are always available. If you have not signed up for the National Restaurant Association's advocacy website, would encourage you to. It's restaurantsacts.com, restaurantsacts.com. You can sign up for email updates there. We have gotten, so we put out 90-second updates from my boss, Sean Kennedy, on an almost weekly basis to let you know what's happening in DC. Those are a great way to find out what's happening specifically as it pertains to restaurants. So would encourage you to do that. But happy to take any questions. And again, thanks everyone for taking the time to watch this.
Thanks, Mike. I do have a couple of questions here in the Q&A. Has there been any progress on the PPP increasing our taxable net income?
Yeah, that's a great question. We continue to push for that in the most recent, whatever happens in the next couple of weeks, that's a top priority for us, making sure that we're able to get that fixed. We were hopeful that Treasury would fix it because Treasury could have. Unfortunately, Treasury has made it clear they're not going to. So we're continuing to push with Congress. We're hopeful that a second round of PPP will not just be, a second round of PPP. It will also be a second round of PPP with new things that will help restaurants. So the taxability part is important. The ability to deduct expenses related to PPE. So all the expenditures you've made on equipment to help your restaurant become safer, that should be included, and that should be allowed to be forgiven as well. So we're hopeful there'll be a second round of PPP, but also a second round of PPP that fixes certain things that uniquely impact the industry.
Thank you. Next question, can you share some of the data about keeping restaurants open that we can share with our local officials?
Sure, so it's a great question. The best thing we have is that, Tom Bonet, who's our CEO, put out a letter to the National Governors Association at this point about 3 weeks ago that pushed back on a lot of the claims that are being made about restaurants. One of the big challenges here is that many governors and other health officials have said that restaurants are part of the problem. And what they're pointing to are studies that are hypothetical or simulations. They aren't tied to actual cases in actual restaurants. There was a Stanford study that came out a couple of weeks ago. It got all kinds of publicity. And it was based upon a simulation using cell phone data. It wasn't tied to actual cases. What we have been pushing for is if governors or mayors are going to shut down restaurants, they need to provide the actual data, and this is hard data, that is showing that restaurants are the problem. Because we don't see it, we don't hear about it. I will also tell you in terms of the actual hard data question, we are in the midst of doing some research looking at exactly that hard data that I am hopeful we'll be able to share in the coming days that looks at this issue because there hasn't been comprehensive data to date, which has been a challenge for us. So it's a work in progress. Our major efforts right now are pushing back on the studies that are out there that claim that we are a problem, but that are claiming that based upon incomplete or not actual applicable data. So it's an ongoing conversation.
And I appreciate that, Mike, because I have to say we share that exact same frustration. It is literally, we have been begging for data from the very beginning from local and state public health officials, and it's not there. In fact, we pulled up the data that the state published on the website for Colorado that's on the governor's website, and it showed when we analyzed it quite the opposite, that like 2% of the cases from November 18th data that we found were 2% were from restaurants, and a significant portion were from colleges and universities, prisons, obviously, elderly care, long-term care facilities. But we've also heard a number of public health officials tell us they agree with us that they don't think the data is there, which is why this is so frustrating that they're doing it, I think, sort of anecdotally, as in, well, because you have to take your masks off when you eat and drink, that's why we're shutting you down. And it just doesn't fit. So I'll look forward to seeing what progress you can make there. We do have a couple of other questions here. Did you say that there was an effort to prioritize the vaccinations to restaurant workers?
Yes, so that work was underway at the federal level. We joined with several other food service industries to send a letter to CDC to encourage the prioritization of restaurant workers. Restaurant workers are deemed essential workers by the Department of Homeland Security. That is why restaurants, even in the absolute height of the March-April pandemic spike, were able to stay open for takeout, drive-through, and delivery. We think that if grocery workers are being vaccinated at a high level and they are deemed essential and early on, that restaurant workers should be as well. So we're continuing to push that at the federal level. We're also working with our state partners to push that at the state level, because at the end of the day, the federal government puts out guidance and the states are then going to determine how that's actually interpreted. So it's a 50-state strategy, but yes, we are pushing for that because we believe that restaurants are a critical part of the United States' infrastructure in terms of food, and that restaurant workers should be vaccinated as soon as possible.
Thank you. Another question here, how can big tech help the industry? Hudson, you're on mute, Hudson.
When you think about the productivity of the restaurant industry, that one slide in there that showed that sales per employee were just $66,000. The most important thing in a very labor-intensive industry such as ours is when technology is introduced, either in the front of the house, back of the house, or through the smartphone, it can really increase productivity and efficiency. And so from a technology provider standpoint, in particularly talking to a restaurant operator, it's very important to communicate to them to view any outlays for technology as an investment and not just an expense. And more importantly, from a tech standpoint, looking at the consumer base for restaurateurs as America continues to age and the younger generations become more important, their expectation is that a restaurant experience incorporates some aspect of technology. And if it doesn't, then they will not participate. So not only educating the operator about the impact, but also from the consumer perspective of making a more convenient, seamless experience ends up being a win-win for both the consumer and the operator.
Thank you. Nick, I know you had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Sonia. And thanks, Hudson and Mike, for being on this. This was really great information. Hudson, in your presentation, you mentioned that the projected sales for 2021 will likely not make up the losses of 2020. In a recent Council of State Restaurant Association conference that we all had, there was an economist that had mentioned that full service restaurants never really fully recovered from the Great Recession. And I wanted to know, do you anticipate a similar recovery for the industry? Is it going to, or do you think it's going to take less time than the Great Recession?
Well, obviously, one, to determine how much and fast growth will be going forward, one has to know where the bottom is. And so I know we're optimistic about the vaccine and maybe by next summer, but until one actually knows the bottom of the trough, it's tough to do projections going forward. Now, the table service segment obviously was the largest segment. However, when you look at the annualized growth rates for table service versus quick service over the past decade, quick service has definitely posted higher growth rates. Primarily, a lot of that is convenience driven. But the table service segment will certainly remain large. If you look at the history of segment growth in the restaurant industry, it isn't really that one segment contracts and disappears. It's that additional avenues of growth present themselves. So for example, in the table service segment, which has not been as technology enabled as the quick service segment has, there's more technology pouring into that, and particularly in their ability to tap the off-premises market, which heretofore many had not focused on. So it isn't really a case of certain segments or operational concepts disappearing. It's just a question of how they adapt to the new frontier coming out of this, which will place renewed emphasis on not only convenience, but also socialization. In other words, the socialization driver at the moment is totally void for the industry. And it is a very important driver going forward, that need for consumers to socialize. So table service obviously taps into that. And looking at the future of the industry overall, you know, consumers, 90% of consumers enjoy going to a restaurant, and that's held fairly stable even through the pandemic. So that driver is still there. And fortunately, as the industry continues to grow, it not only allows existing segments to continue to grow, even though in a more moderate form, it allows new venues for growth going forward.
Thank you. One of the questions that came in, and I'll take the first stab at this, but I'm curious, Mike, what you've been hearing in other states. Has there been any progress on the concept of a 5-star COVID protocol to reopen restaurants that are shut down? So folks may have seen the call for feedback that we sent out last week regarding this 5-star certification program that the state is considering right now. They're working closely with Mesa County, and we've had a number of conversations with Mesa County about their program. They're actually, you know, Mesa County's got such a great attitude in that their head of their public health department really looks at health beyond just COVID cases. They're looking at it as job losses, people basically maintaining their life holistically in a healthy way, and part of that's working and keeping the economy open. And so when their approach is, they believe and are pushing to get restaurants even in the red level back at 50%. But I'm hearing rumors that that may not be the direction that the governor's office is going. They're still analyzing that information. I do feel hopeful that they're going to put something out. The biggest question is there going to be something that includes the red level of shutdowns, which now I think, 28 or so counties are in. So we're pushing on that every day. I also want to let you know that we are now starting to speak to engineers and other experts regarding air circulation. I've also been talking about the other colleagues of mine in other states that are looking at similar things and how we can share that information. I have reached out to the head of COVID response team in the governor's office and asked if they're open to having a meeting with us about that, and they said that they are. So hopefully that's something that we'll be able to make some progress on soon. I see you guys smiling. You're watching my cats in the background attacking each other. They're kittens, and they love doing this whenever we're on a call. But anyway, Mike, have you heard any things that are in particular successful, or that you're starting to see progress on in other states that they're pushing to open up beyond, you know, what normally they're being allowed to do?
Haven't seen a ton on it across the country, to be honest. I will say there are numerous examples of where the state has partnered with businesses, usually the restaurant industry, to create protocol that almost give you a certification of, you know, this restaurant has been deemed, I don't want to call it healthy, but, you know, has been, you know, is in compliance with everything the Department of Health recommends. And I think, you know, that not only from a perspective of working with the government, but also from a public health perspective, I think customers like seeing those sorts of things. I mean, from what we've seen, customers really like not to feel like you're in like a hospital in terms of there being so much stuff, but they like the idea, you know, people wearing masks and the sanitization, and they want to feel safe. So anything that can be done, especially as it relates to a certification program or almost a seal of approval from the government, I do think it is very helpful, especially from a consumer confidence perspective.
Thank you. You know, I think this is probably a good question to end on here. This person asks, everyone in my circle of business owners is worn out and so discouraged. What's your best advice on how to hang on and stay hopeful?
Well, I mean, from the consumer perspective, they really, really enjoy the restaurant industry. They want to use it. And there is the light at the end of the tunnel. The question is, how far is that distance to get to that light? And so, you know, is the situations where you don't know where the end point is are the most discouraging. But I think it has become clear over the past few months that the end is realistically in sight. And so once that tunnel ends, the consumers have substantial pent-up demand. There will be some income challenges. But the fact is, you know, whether it's a Gallup survey or consumer surveys, Americans love to use the restaurant industry. It's one of the most highly regarded industries in the country today by consumers. Yeah. And so they want to spend in it.
I would say similarly, yeah, not saying every single state official or every single local official is great in this, because they're not all. But the sympathy and the help that so many government officials have of, you know, it's challenging times for them because cases are rising. At the end of the day, the public looks to them to keep people safe. But we have seen mayors, governors, members of Congress reach out to us and say, how can we help? What can we do? And we haven't always been able to get what we want, especially at the federal level. But elected officials are listening to us. The media is listening to us in a way that, you know, I've never seen in my 8 years here. And we really have the opportunity to push them and say, okay, you're sympathetic. You asked how you can help. Here's how you can help. Go do it. And, you know, especially at the local level, we are seeing progress there and seeing the ability to get mayors and sometimes governors too to pass things that are restaurant specific or to use their social media to push customers to go to restaurants. So, you know, it is extremely challenging, and elected officials are not always our allies in the last couple of months, but you know, there are a lot of officials who are out there and really do genuinely want to help however they can.
You know, I would agree, and I think Nick would say the same. We've been being reached out to by a lot more locals who are saying, I think they're finally seeing that how much restaurants are hurting. We're starting to get their sympathy a bit. I'm hoping that's going to follow through in the legislative session. But we're starting to see that with grants and other things, that they're at least making an effort because they realize how much this industry is really struggling. So I think it's a combination of things that's going to help. But just know, everybody, we are pushing every single day to help get you open, help get you relief, and are very well aware that you need a lot more than what's happening right now. So feel free to reach out to us anytime. Don't forget, if you're not getting our emails, you can go to corestaurant.org, click on the Coronavirus Resources Center, and right at the very top, you can sign up. You don't need to be a member to sign up. And thank you both, Mike and Hudson, for everything that you are doing to fight for restaurants every day and to help on a national scale. We certainly appreciate it and know how busy you are, so appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, take care.